thanks, Vicky, and your team for risking inviting me down to spend the day with you. And really, I've got the best job at AIA. I don't get paid that well, but certainly at the end of each day, I have this great sense of power. We do what's called a payment release, and it involves us having a quick look for the auditors that we paid out people other than some of my team members some benefits. And each day we release over $2 million every working day. And that's fantastic to go home each night knowing that that money is going to be helping people that you've helped in the first instance by making certain that they had some sort of cover. But everything is perspective. I'm going to quickly wander here. They told me not to. I need to do a quick measure. I'm about 1.7 meters tall. So you would probably put another 5 or 6 Howards on top of me before we got up there to about 10 meters. And that's the volume of water that's going to be flowing through a little town called Forbes later today. That's unbelievable. These people have been evacuated out of their houses. This water, they say, is 15 kilometers wide. This is the waterfront. It's all not 10 meters deep. But just look at that from a volume perspective and in terms of what's going to happen to these people's lives. Fortunately, people have been evacuated. They've been really good. We haven't had the same sort of drama we had in Queensland. But really, stuff happens. And I probably, because my day-to-day reality is looking at people's lives who have been disrupted, I get really crazy about people who are cynical about life insurance and the value that it brings. I can't believe people can still sit around believing that stuff won't happen to them. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at what we're going to chat about today. There's a whole heap of things, but I think what I'd like to, by the end of our discussion, have achieved that every claim comes with expectations that are quite unique from the claimant, and they've been set largely by yourselves. There's the expectation from the advisor, and often with some vigorous advice around the claim as well. And then there's the assessor who's got to sit there and piece all the bits together. And we give out a 80-page odd PDS, and probably 50% of what we get in the PDS is easy to link to a claim. But largely claim events are unique, and we've got to start joining the dots and putting together pieces of information that start creating a picture for the assessor to come up to a decision. We pay about 96% of all claims that come through the door, so that's not a bad record, and I think it suggests that we're probably doing the thing right. So, some thoughts. Let's start at the top end. How many Australians we've got in the country? And this is off the Department of Statistics website, some 22.8 million Australians. And the birth rate, fortunately, is quicker than the death rate, so we're growing the population, a net gain of 1 international migrant, that's me, thank you all, and leading to an overall increase in the population 1 minute in every 34 seconds. So what happens then? People start dying. We have recorded in 2009 140,000 deaths, a death rate of 5.7 per 1,000 Australians. Highest death rate in Northern Territory. Intriguing because there's so few people there. They must obviously drink and fight a lot there because it's unusual that a country that's that vast and underpopulated has the highest death rate. Followed at the lowest, the Australian Capital Territories. Now I did a little research here along with my actuarial friends, and they advised me that within that state it is legal to make pornographic movies and to keep recreational drugs. So I asked him if there was any correlation with longevity, and he refused to put anything in writing, but you can draw your own conclusions. The last statistic is really the one that worries me most, is the high incidence of cancers. And amongst the young, seeing terminally ill people in their 30s and 40s is really heartbreaking for us in the claims space. But that seems to be a growing trend. Mental health certainly is also a huge concern for us. And I show you these stats to illustrate that the claim event per se, unrelated to mental health issues, how potentially complicated it can be by having this secondary condition as part of the claim, and how difficult it is in an income protection space or a TPD space to manage 2 claim events simultaneously. They complicate each other. They make return to work plans a lot more difficult. So that is a growing concern for us, is the high number of mental health claims. I think the second stat that was a little concerning, but I thought marriage caused stress, but apparently not. It's the other way around. The single people struggle with stress more than the married ones. So that'll make a lot of wives very happy. Drugs and assaults, this is also a worrying trend. Think about it again in the context of a claim potential where there's some drug overlay, individuals using recreational drugs on top of the physical condition that they're claiming for. It becomes very difficult, again, in helping people getting back to work. Physical assaults again, it's possible to say the wrong thing to a lady and be assaulted by them as well. And the last one is also worrying, is the correlation between smoking and violent death. The stat, I think, from the cancer department is that 1 in 4 Australians smoke. That seems very high still, and yet later on I'll talk about mortality trends going forward. It doesn't seem to be coming through in terms of lung cancers, but that's not a reason to smoke. Disability and obesity, disability affecting 1 in 5 Australians. Again, that's a very high proportion of the population who struggle with one or other disability. For most people, they're able to carry on and their lifestyles are adjusted and they lead perfectly normal lives, but for many we know that they can land up as a claim. And then the obesity statistic is also a concerning one as well. And I'll show you how that relates to claims trends going forward based on that. And I use this slide really, every time I use it I say to myself, I must take it out next time because it doesn't really have a context. But the context for me here is that these 3 guys tragically died last year in a helicopter accident. They got out of bed in the morning, they went out doing the job that they normally do. They have the terrific job of being journalists and cameramen and helicopter pilots. And their helicopter crashed. One of them was insured with us, the other 2 not. But the tragedy that surrounds this is the immediate family, the kids, the employer, the relatives, all the people that these people touched in their lives are changed forever. And this is what makes the claims process such an important one, is you're not managing just the individual affected. You're managing a host of other stakeholders and loved ones through this process. And whatever we do to a claimant through that process, it's the rest of their family, their friends, their employers are touched by it. So every claim, there's an awful Monty Python skit called "Every Sperm is Sacred." In the claims space, every claim is sacred. There's no question that when a claim occurs, we need to be set up from the advisor through to the claims department and make sure that this claims experience is one that is remembered for all the right reasons at the end of it. So let's talk about a couple of cases that I randomly selected. Well, that's a bit of a lie. I didn't randomly select it. There are cases that we've had flowing across our desks over time, and they each illustrate a different story. This was a particularly interesting one where a fellow was accepted at standard rates, no problem. He called into, he went on claim, he injured his back. He was an electrician, and he had been on claim for a couple of years. He called in and he said, look, he's wanting to go back to his country of origin. How would that affect his claim? And we were concerned about his country of origin. The health systems and generally medical services there weren't particularly good. It was more third world. And we thought, well, look, we understand the request. Let's see how best to manage it. So I arranged for him to be medically examined, which the doctor did. The doctor expressed some concerns that the reported symptoms and what he had found on examination didn't correlate. We then said, let's have a factual discussion with this client and understand more about why he's wanting to go back to his land of origin. And in doing this, we visited a couple of social media websites. We visited a couple of government websites to find that this chap, along with 13 of his countrymen, had just been found and convicted of fraudulently obtaining all their trade certificates. So this claimant, along with all his colleagues, had been wiring houses illegally in Australia for the last 10 or so years. So this was an incidental finding. On our side, we had paid the claim for 2 odd years, so we sort of said, okay, there's the criminal element of it, and that's up to the state to deal with, but from an insurance perspective, he wouldn't have got a policy that offered a to age 65 benefit. He would have got a 2-year benefit as an unqualified tradesperson, and therefore we've paid you for 2.5 years, we're going to end the benefit now. The policyholder was irritated, cancelled his policy, and we are happy with that outcome. But an odd sort of chain of events that was very coincidental. Had he not asked us about his offshore adventure, we possibly would have been paying this claim to age 65. This is a sad case, and it's just one of those where neither the advisor nor ourselves could have made a difference. But the chap took out the policy, he declared some stress, nothing more. We didn't investigate it. He was he was a personnel officer. The pictured underwriting looked innocuous and policy was issued. He then put in a disability claim for a mental health problem. We looked at it and it was really serious. He was institutionalized. And we called for Medicare records, and we don't call for Medicare records in all cases and only certain instances. And unfortunately, this poor chap, for the 3 or 4 years prior to his policy being taken out, he had been heavily medicated. He had been institutionalized a number of times. He didn't disclose it. And I just think about the dynamics within the sales process. How on earth does an individual who is completely strange to yourself divulge a history like that with all the stigma that goes with this sort of stuff? And it's just so unfortunate. And I think the lesson possibly for us is that if you detect any sense of discomfort or hesitancy at the sales stage, suggest that we get a doctor involved, get a PMAR sorted out, so that one isn't left with a situation like this. So yeah, we couldn't honor the claim, and we certainly couldn't continue to be his insurer. This was very tragic. You probably will all recall this. This was a case that was taken out. The chap was medically loaded, medically examined, and just prior to the policy being issued, he changed jobs. He joined a very prominent mining corporation in the country, and you'll recall in 2010 that tragic aeroplane accident in Cameroon where the entire board of a mining company were wiped out. And here's the sad truth, is that this chap filled in the application form. He said no to flying other than in commercial airlines. He took on this job. They all jumped onto Ken Talbot's executive jet. This was a 20-seater odd jet, and they're off to Cameroon to go and inspect their latest coal mine. When they got there, the landing strip was too short, so they went back to the capital in Cameroon, and they downgraded to a shonky Russian plane, which crashed. A little bit of research on the plane, I discovered 700 of them were built, 200 have crashed around the world. So what happens with these things, they get farmed out into these third world locations where the safety records aren't exactly known. So these guys go out in the safest possible jet, they downgrade, this thing crashes. So we sit around saying, okay, he said he wasn't going to fly in anything but commercial airlines. What difference does that make in this circumstance? This wasn't something that was intended. This is all just a chain of awful events that occurred one after the other, leading to his death and the death of his fellow board members. So I gave a couple of scenarios to our executive team, and I said, look, if we go ask for this and get that, what we're going to do with it? It's a bit like a dog chasing a car. When you catch it, what you're going to do with it? And certainly it was just a no-win situation from my perspective, that whatever channel we went down, this is a claim, let's just pay it. Stuff happens. I detected no, there was no fraud, there was no There was no anything. It was just a very sad event. So we paid out a couple of million on this one, and I'm very happy we did, and I think it was the right thing to do. This is an interesting case, and I keep using it even though it's quite old. It's a case, the chap was insured just under $3 million odd. I picked this case up. I just started at AIA, and we still had paper files then. We're now paperless. And I looked at this, and this fellow was found outside his house with the kitchen carving knife through his chest. And it had gone through his intercostal muscles, those between the ribs, right through his right atrium, and he had died instantly. And he was found outside his house first thing in the morning by a passerby. And the initial findings were that this was a suicide. There was a note. So I'm looking at this file, and I should only think these things and not say them, but I look at a picture of him, and he was a big, burly guy involved in the transport industry. He weighed probably 120 odd kilograms. He had one of those chaps who didn't have a neck. It was kind of his head went straight into his shoulders. And I looked at the picture of his wife, and she was a 50-kilogram, really good-looking lady. But those of you who have been overseas and seen the Mona Lisa, you know that little smile? And I'm thinking, who was on the blunt end of that knife when it went in? I couldn't help but thinking she just looked far too relaxed and happy, and he looked too big and strong to put a knife through his own chest. Anyway, there was a coronial investigation. The police couldn't find DNA. They couldn't find fingerprints. And my suspicions remain, but I have no evidence, and certainly we paid out that claim. It occurred soon after the suicide exclusion period had expired. So despite any of our wildest imaginations, in the absence of hard evidence, insurance policies pay out. Yeah, that was an interesting one. So lump sum business is pretty easy, just from a claims logic perspective. One always looks at what was said at underwriting. What the claim event is for is that a sickness that typically would have a long duration lead up before death. If not, it's obviously easier the longer between the acceptance and the death or the crisis event. Certainly the less needs to worry. We do worry about very early claims for cancer. In the crisis area, it certainly is a concern, but in the absence of evidence, it's a claim. So lump sum business, underwriting disclosures are important. Early accidents, stuff happens, and there's not a great deal one can do about that, and we pay for it. Income protection is a different story. Probably 2/3 of the money we pay out is for lump sum business, crisis, TPD, and death. 1/3 of the money is paid out for income protection. But it's about 80% of the work goes into the income protection book. It's those monthly or biannual reports that have to certify continuous disablement. And our biggest challenge is really where you have a claimant who becomes comfortable as a claimant, but has capacity to potentially return to work, where a doctor within the system is passive about signing a monthly claim form because they're not incentivized to do anything different. The Medicare system keeps them under the pump. So being proactive with my claim form is an unlikely event. So those combinations certainly, what those combinations do is that we price products with an average duration in mind for most conditions. And we know for some conditions they will go to age 65, and that is priced for. But it's for those conditions that we have got a good amount of science from a journal called the MDA Guidelines, and the MDA Guidelines tells us very specifically for this condition, for this gender, for this age, and for this occupation sort, this thing should last 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Now, from a pricing perspective, it's really important to try and manage those claims in a bell curve where you'll have early returns to work, you'll have an average return to work for that condition, and then you'll have your long tail claims, which are expected, and they're priced for that. But if there isn't active rehabilitation and active assistant to a claimant, these claims can drift into what we call that deadly syndrome called fox-tail butt syndrome. And that's when the claimant becomes more used to their remote control than getting back to work. And that's really a hard space for us, is to persuade people who have now got comfortable with the notion that they are disabled and their doctor is certifying them, and that's their new life. And it's really not good for them. It's not good for their family. We don't believe it's good for the community. And we very actively assist claimants early in claims to start considering their return to work in a structured way, in a couple of hours a day way, and to ultimately get them back to their pre-disability capacity. For claimants that we know there will be no significant change in their condition, or they have a condition of a deteriorating nature, I certainly don't want to send them off monthly to their doctors to get forms signed, and I'll put them into an auto-pay space where we will pay for 3 to 6 months on an ongoing basis, and just have a review every now and again to see how they're tracking. So we certainly look at each claim in its own context to see how best does this suit the individual and that circumstance. And then if I think about the toughest phone calls I've had, usually with an advisor on the other end yelling at me, it's where we don't keep advisors in the loop. And I don't blame you to get uptight when you get a call from a claimant where the claim has gone off track, and the first time you hear about it is them yelling at you. So I really insist that the team keeps you involved in the loop. And I haven't had kickback from advisors when they understand the context of what we're doing with the claim. We find advisors to be supportive when they have and understand the facts around the case. So thanks. So, tough claims here. We have people who are underwritten who have doctors for 10 years. They come on claim and it's a brand new doctor. So there's no context, there's no history. We worry about those sometimes. Conditions with subjective symptoms. So those are the claims where they tell the doctor, I'm in pain, I've got dizzy spells, I'm feeling nauseous, and all those good things where there isn't a great deal of science around it. Not that these are not claims, it's just more difficult to prove from our side. And they just become a little more challenging. Claim conditions that don't improve over time. We cannot have people on claim for 10 years on 5 milligrams of Valium a day. We should all be on 5 milligrams of Valium a day. Make us all much more relaxed about life. And we have those claimants that just continue on low-grade medication. They don't get better, they don't get worse. Those are difficult. Unmotivated claimants, yep. Recessionary times. During the global financial crisis, we didn't experience an increase in claims, but what we did experience is an increase in duration of claims within the income protection space. That's wound its way back, and claims are tracking pretty well where they were before. And late submission of claims that prevent us from actively trying to manage claims. This is more a group issue. Within the group space, income protection claim usually submitted 9 months after the event. For most people, they should be back at work. We shouldn't be even looking at them, but that is a big challenge in the group space. In the retail space, less of a challenge. So, before you click that, just a second. We do some of this sometimes. We do surveillance. This is not night surveillance, as someone pointed out. This is just normal surveillance. But we do surveillance where the claim event, the medical records, and our communication with the claimant start getting us worried. So we get worried when claimants are more active than me. If you're totally disabled, we expect you to spend a bit of time at home. You can't spend all your time at the gym and surf and play golf. We know it's good for you therapeutically, but essentially someone who is totally disabled should be less active. So if we phone you at your house often and you're not there, and then God forbid your child says you're at work, we often need to call in some people just to help us gather a body of evidence that perhaps will motivate you back to work. So if you want to click the button there, let's take a look at some of our better-known customers recently. This fellow was on claim for 6 months up until this time for bilateral carpal tunnel syndrome. So he walked around, he had these 2 limp wrists, took lots of painkillers, and he could do nothing. He struggled to get dressed. He struggled to drive his car. He struggled really to do everything. And his doctor certified all of this. And I didn't put the sound on because he's actually screaming. Every time he touches that ball, he yells in great pain. So what happened with this is that we started getting a bit worried, and we went and looked on a couple of websites and found that each week he was getting great accolades for being the best footy player at his club. And we had this totally disabled individual, so we decided to pay him a visit. And I really like this piece of video because he's so feisty. He looks for fights. He does all sorts of things. As you can see, his wrists don't seem to be too much of a problem through the process. So what we did is we had a conversation with him afterwards. He said, you can't be totally disabled and be so fit simultaneously. It doesn't count. And he said he was waiting to have, in fact, his operation. It was 6 months due. So we did a deal with him and paid him 1 or 2 months advance benefits. And we got him operated on, and we got him back to work a lot earlier than he would have done and enhancing his footy career whilst being on claim. So, yeah, it's also unfair to his teammates that he had the whole day to go to gym and really get good at his sport while we paid for it. So, yeah, not allowed. The next fellow, he had chronic lower back problems. He was a tradesperson before he went on claim, and his activity statements told us that he spent a fair amount of his day lying in bed, taking lots of painkillers and being awfully sick most of the time. And his doctors signed these certificates month after month after month. He was the chap who just seemed to be a lot more active than necessary when we would try to call him, and he was very cagey about everything we had asked him. So we decided to find out how closely correlated his activity statements were to his day-to-day existence. And yep, he was clearly having a very good day. With surveillance, though, what we can't do is I can't take an individual image and use that as evidence in isolation, because he could say, guys, I actually woke up that day feeling terrific. I've been lying in bed for the last 3 months, look at my wasted body, but I got up that day and I felt great. I had no pain, I took my medication, I decided to go off and work. So we would have to visit people like this whose claim forms and activity statements start going a bit awry. We would have to visit them a few times to get a consistent pattern of behavior so that we don't get told this was a miraculous day and that in fact he was in bed for the next 6 weeks because of this. So we visited him a few days in a row, and yep, he continued to be as agile as he is here. The problem here, of course, is that this is just fraud. This is robbery without firearms and knives. And the problem is we should be prosecuting people like this, but we don't. The industry is far too nice. To get a case to this level, there are thousands of dollars spent in our time, external time, with surveillance people, as well as doctors. This is one of my favorites as well. This young lady is a solicitor, still, and she had very bad back problems that prevented her sitting at her desk and concentrating for any sort of time. And she got headaches, and she got all sorts of evil things happen to her because of her bad back. So clearly we caught her on the day she was training to be part of the Olympic teams going to London, woman gymnast, and we watched her for a couple of hours, and things get better because good things happen to good people. She locked herself out of her house coming back from gym. So here she's trying to work out if she can crawl under her gate, which she couldn't, and she has a problem. Now, the surveillance guys are telling us their biggest challenge at this point was holding the camera still and not laughing, because they were watching this thing unfold like Australia's funniest home movies. So this is a lady that's been on claim now for nearly a year, chronic back pain, cannot do anything, can't bend, can't stand, can't sit, can't do a thing. She's now going to do things, and it just gets better. So despite the tree, I think it's no stretch of the imagination what's going to happen next. So yeah, anyone with really back problems is not going to be doing these things. She did a terrific, and she's very elegant. I think she's got great poise and great posture. She nearly locked herself out once again after this, which would have been hysterical, but she managed to stop the gate from closing, go inside, and after our conversation with her, she did go back to work, because we suggested that just in terms of her own chosen occupation and her own reputation, this is not the sort of thing that her employers would possibly be impressed with. So yeah, we do this, we don't do it often, but it's a great story to tell occasionally. Most claims we know are legitimate, genuine. The ones that get into this phase are the ones that over time, where people start getting comfortable, that claiming is cool and easy, and that's where we run into problems, and that's where occasionally we would call out these people. It's expensive, it's messy, I don't enjoy doing it. It's a good laugh sometimes, but this isn't the way to manage claims. I mean, this is purely isolated exception stuff, but good for viewing. So what did we do last year? We released $445 million to people in need. And I think that's just fantastic. And I really do mean it. At the end of each day, my team and myself go home feeling we've helped people. We've made a difference to their lives, because you've managed to make a difference to their lives the years before that. And the promise has been kept. And that's a great story. So, causes of death. Cancer's the big one in the death claims space. The unknowns, don't worry too much about them. It's not a plague or anything. It's just that in certain instances, we don't have final reasons for death, but we use supporting documents. We use phone calls to doctors. We look at newspaper reports. And often within the claim system, that final cause of death has not been put in, but it doesn't detract from really cancers and cardiac being the two biggest causes. TPDs, musculoskeletal, comes through very strongly there. Mental health, also a big one. And that's in the triple A's, double A's categories in your high income earners. Your mental health claims certainly seem to predominate there. Cardiovasculars to a certain smaller degree. Neurologicals would be your strokes. Crisis recovery, that's a worrying one. That's huge. That's huge, the cancers. Absolutely massive. Cardiovasculars, now that we understand what a heart attack is, more significance to that. But certainly the cancers are the real drivers here. And then income protection, back to the musculoskeletals. Cancers, big portion. Interesting with cancer and income protection, certain people, you'll get the cancer claim coming in, we'll pay a specified benefit potentially, and those people go back to work almost immediately. They'll be on chemo, they'll lose their hair, they'll be in dreadful shape, but their coping mechanism is to say, stuff this cancer, I'm going to get on with my life and go back to work. We have other cancer sufferers who the trauma of cancer and them considering their own mortality go into the most awful depressions and really don't cope very well. So you have two almost extremes to the same conditions. And back to the thing, we're all unique and we respond differently to these awful events. So what delays things being paid? Typically, claims are paid faster where advisors get involved. They just are able to take charge in a situation that can be charged, where the family can be in crisis, where the individual can be traumatized. A financial advisor's steady hand through these processes makes claims go quicker. There's no question to that. Certain instances, we can't do things, police investigations, you can't hurry up. You can't do anything about coronial inquiries. Lost medical records, from where I came from, you could buy and sell medical records for about $100. Fortunately, the Medicare system here is a lot more robust, and we don't struggle that much with medical records. We occasionally struggle, if there's an offshore case, to get support in medical documentation offshore, but generally in Australia, one can get medical records fairly easily. Oh, this is my bugbear. Can't we just sell everyone agreed value policies up front? So that when their legs are in plaster and they've had their stroke or their heart attack or been diagnosed with cancer, we don't go fishing around trying to get financial evidence to support a claim. It's really a bad time. I do understand why we sell indemnities. I do understand unverified policies. But when a claim happens, it's just one of those obstacle courses we can best do without. And sometimes people's policies are not enforced. Last year I had 3 policies, 3 claims. People wrote in and specifically said, please cancel this policy. And one of them, they were cross with us for something and said, please cancel it. The other 2 were thinking about taking out other policies. 2 of them were diagnosed with, one was leukemia, one was with cancer, one person was awfully messed up in a car accident, and they had cancelled their own policies. Guys, those people could have been in days of grace. Just let these things die normally. Stuff happens, you know. Just every day is probably, I go home and shake my head saying, geez, some poor bugger got out of bed this morning and his day and his life has changed forever. And that's at AIA, that's at every insurance company in Australia. And non-receipt of required information, sometimes it's just too hard. And people are not well, it just becomes too hard for them to pursue things, to get financials, to get medical sorted out. This is where you can play such a big role in this process. So, the future of claims. This is the fun stuff. I'm going to start at the bottom, because a lot of our claims for subjective conditions, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, chronic pain syndromes, these are real conditions. They're medically well documented. Just the evidence around them is so awfully difficult to interpret and understand. And certainly there's work within this space where doctors will be able to, going forward, identify levels of real pain. And that'll help with treatment, that'll help legitimacy around what actually this individual is struggling with. So that's great. Mid-cab stuff is also very interesting, where you had bypass operations historically. They used to open your chest up and cut you from your neck down to your belly button. It was awfully traumatic in itself. A lot of surgery techniques now are the keyhole surgeries, so recovery rates are so much quicker, where previously someone had a bypass operation, 3 to 6 months off at least. We've got people going back to work after 2 to 3 weeks now, which will make a big difference, I think, from a product design point of view going forward. What used to be a crisis event going forward is possibly less of a crisis event because of modern medicine. Telephony, I'm a great believer that we should run claims, talking to claimants in most instances. I just think sending forms is impersonal, and I don't think we get the information we need. I think that a well-trained person at the other end of the phone does the trick in most instances, and I encourage our team to do that more often than not. Customized forms, we've historically had generic forms that go into pages and pages. We're redoing our forms. If it's a cancer claim, it is a cancer questionnaire. We ask cancer questions. We don't ask about your musculoskeletal system and all sorts of non-relevant issues. So that for doctors and claimants will make that process a lot easier. And then claims analytics, this is certainly a big area. We know and have records of claims going back many years. What we need to do is get smarter about predicting the likely outcome of a claim when it comes into the front door, so I can give the claim to the person with the best experience to manage that claim, and to try and deal with complications before they arise, because we know from history claims like this, typically something will happen down the track. So we certainly need to get smart about that. And I still need people at the end of the telephone. I really believe that when someone logs a claim with us, they need to talk to people, not to a call center and not to some faceless technology that does voice recognition. I need to feel and sense the claimant and help them through the process as best as possible. So, very briefly, Australians are living a lot longer, no question about it. Men die a little earlier. We don't know if it's voluntary or not, but certainly the trend is, with modern medicine and lifestyles, people living longer. Ischemic heart disease certainly shown a downward trend, and this has got a lot to do with early detection, as well as advertising campaigns. We now eat awful margarine and not decent butter and stuff like that, and certainly over time that's shown very positive trends around ischemic heart disease. Strokes, the same thing, a lot of the same drivers from the cardiac space, blood pressure checks being driven down. Dementia, our aging population. This has got nothing to do, and no comments about gender and dementia, but rather this is a disease of the elderly, and as people live longer, certainly dementia is likely to be an ongoing challenge for the elderly. Lung cancer is surprising. I thought that this would go up given the smoking, the high number of smokers in the country. But again, it's early detection, people having screening done. That seems to be the trick. So a consistent flat, but it's sad when it's such an avoidable one. I've got a spouse who smokes, it drives me mad. I go home with ugly pictures, worse than the ones in her cigarette box, and she still smokes, so I don't know. Diabetes, that's the one related to that overweight and obesity early on. Certainly that's an increase in worrying trend, and the complications thereof. So it's not diabetes per se, it's all the other complications around diabetes that will cause us claims. This is something I share with a lot of trepidation initially, but with a lot of pride now, is that we invited the risk store into our claims shop and said, tell us about the claimant's experience. We get reassurance audits, they tell us about our technical skills. We get the financial people to make sure that I'm not paying my family claims each month. But this is an audit about what the claimant's experience was, what we say we do, and actually how the claimant experienced that. So I go through, this is the second time it's happened, we go through a very nervous time where you open up your claims book and claims are randomly selected, and the risk store tests every step of the way. When we spoke to people, how they experienced the conversation, what letters we wrote to them, were the letters coherent, did we always keep them informed of the next steps? And we got an A rating at the end of that nervous period, and we will probably do it again. And I'm surprised other companies aren't doing this, because we all talk about claims, we all say that they're central to our business, but no one really tests the claimant experience. And I think as an industry, we owe it to ourselves to have some honesty about it. This was a good process, very nervous at the end of it, but I'm still here, so we'll do it again sometime. So, what you sell needs to perform when a crisis happens. There's no question about it. And it's up to me to make sure that on my end, we do the best we can, and certainly from your peace of mind, the promises you've made years before the policy, the crisis event happens, that we've put the right advice in place, we've got the sums assured correct, and that the policy performs. More evidence at underwriting really does make things easier, because it just takes away any grayness at claims stage, because things get a bit messy and there can be ambiguity, so the more stuff that comes out earlier, the better. People who are nervous to tell you stuff, don't make it up for them. Just rather get a doctor involved, get a decent record. It's just so much better for the claim management. If you're not certain, give us a buzz and assist your client making a claim. By the very definition, it's at that time they need your help. Those forms can be complicated. I need to correlate medical information with client statements. You guys are best positioned to do that for us. And then at the end of the day, when a claim is paid, it really is a victory for us as an industry and a great story. So with that, thank you so much.